the moment the screwdriver hit my shoulder. I didn't scream. I remember the look on his face, rage, confusion, and something else I can't name. Blood warmed my skin, ran down my arm, and for a second, I thought the pain might finally make them see me. But when my father appeared at the doorway, he didn't move, and my stepmother just laughed, shaking her head like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Christina," she said softly, "stop being so dramatic." That was the night something in me went quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I realized I would never survive this family by screaming louder. I'd have to survive by remembering everything. The metallic crash sliced through the silence. 2:07 a.m. blinked red on the clock beside my bed. Wind howled against the window, but the sound below was heavier, slow, scraping, deliberate, something being dragged across the concrete floor. I slipped on a sweater, my bare feet pressing against the cold wood of the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, my breath sharp and uneven. When I reached the bottom, I froze. Landon stood in the half-light, his skin pale and slick with sweat, the sour smell of liquor clinging to him. In his hand, a power screwdriver glinted under a trembling red laser. "Still think you're better than me, huh?" His voice was a low snarl. My heart pounded so hard it blurred my vision. I managed to whisper his name, then heat and steel ripped through my right shoulder. The pain came before the sound, a white flash that emptied every breath from my lungs. I hit the wall. Darkness swallowed the room. Somewhere above, footsteps rushed, voices, then stopped. My father appeared first, then Marjorie behind him, her face calm, almost amused. "Dad, he stabbed me. Please." She tilted her head, smile small and cruel. "Oh, Christina, stop being so dramatic." They turned away. I sank to the floor, one hand pressed to the wound, the other tapping my watch 3 times. The screen lit faintly, SOS sent. Blood pulsed through my fingers, warm against the cold air. They didn't look back. Their footsteps faded, and all that remained was the metallic tang of my own blood and the steady hum of the wind. I stared at the ceiling, whispering through clenched teeth, a promise only I could hear. They'll never hear me scream again. They'll hear the evidence. Outside, sirens grew closer, echoing against the frozen glass. And when the first snow began to fall, I watched it hit the window in soft metallic taps, each one a reminder that steel survives the cold. So would I. I woke up to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the hum of hospital lights. My shoulder was wrapped tight, the pain dull but steady, like it had settled in to stay. At the end of the bed stood a young officer with a notebook pressed against his chest. He said it flatly, without meeting my eyes, that my stepbrother claimed it was an accident. I laughed, brittle and short. An accident that leaves a screwdriver lodged in your shoulder? He didn't reply. He just nodded, wrote something, and left. A few minutes later, Marjorie glided in, wearing a spotless white coat, the color of denial. She smiled, soft and deliberate, like this was all a misunderstanding she could tidy up before breakfast. "Let's not make a scene. Christina, your father's stressed enough." Robert stood behind her, silent, nodding as if she were translating the world for him. Before I could even sit up, the two of them had signed papers I hadn't seen. By the time I understood what they were doing, the report was withdrawn. Marjorie bent close, perfume sweet and suffocating. Families heal faster when they're quiet. Her words pulled me backward, through years of silence and snow, to another winter that smelled of cinnamon and false warmth. I was 16 then, the first winter after my mother's funeral. I'd just received the letter, an engineering scholarship I'd worked for all year. My hands shook when I held it out at dinner. "Dad." I got in. "They said my design." But Marjorie snatched the envelope, her voice lilting like she was reading a nursery rhyme. "Christina's been accepted into a special needs program. Isn't that sweet?" Laughter broke around the table. My father tapped his spoon against the glass, smiling nervously. "She tries her best." That night, I tore the letter into pieces and shoved it into the trash. A paper edge caught my finger, slicing the skin. Just a small cut. But it scarred, just like tonight. And then, lying in that hospital bed, I remembered something I'd never questioned. Back then, Marjorie had signed the scholarship form with my father's name. Her handwriting had been perfect. I hadn't understood why she smiled when I asked how she knew his signature so well. Now, watching her sign the withdrawal papers, I recognized the same curve, the same false elegance. This wasn't the first time she'd forged his name. It was just the first time I saw it. If they were masters at pretending, I'd become an expert at recording. That was the moment the silence cracked. Not loud, not visible, but deep enough to start the shift from victim to witness, from the girl they erased to the woman who would document every lie. 3 weeks later, they called it recovery. I called it returning to the scene. The house was colder than the snow outside, the air heavy with disinfectant and avoidance. No apology waited for me, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the echo of footsteps that stopped when I entered a room. One night, I heard voices rising from the basement. Landon's whisper was rough, soaked in fear. "Mom, she's gonna tell someone." Marjorie's reply slid through the air like oil. "Then we make sure no one believes her." I stayed in the dark hallway, my heartbeat counting every word. When the house finally went still, I went to the garage where Landon spent his nights, tools scattered across the bench, the smell of gasoline and metal thick in the air. Between tangled wires and stained rags sat a glass jar filled with white powder and a military-grade chemical kit, the kind that didn't belong anywhere near this house. I didn't shout. I didn't even breathe. I just pulled a thermal microcamera from my pocket, something I'd kept from an old project, and fixed it inside the vent above his workbench. The green light blinked once. Recording. "By morning!" Marjorie's voice came from the kitchen phone, sharp but calm. "Christina, don't go poking around. Curiosity is dangerous. Only for the ones with something to hide," I said, and hung up before she could answer. 3 days later, the footage came through. Landon hunched over the table, mixing powder, weighing, sealing. The light from the bulb swung over his face, wild and hollow. My stomach turned, but I didn't look away. I copied every second to an external drive and pried up a loose floorboard beneath my bed. It fit perfectly, hidden under the wood. For the first time, I held something heavier than fear, a weapon made of truth. Outside, snow covered the roof in a seamless sheet of silver. Light reflected off it in narrow streaks, cutting across the window and my bandaged shoulder. I wrote in my notebook, "Hand steady now. If warmth won't protect me, precision will." That night, the house slept like nothing had changed, but under the floor, under the wallpaper, under every inch of that perfect white silence, something had begun to move, quiet, exact, unstoppable. I met Elaine Porter at a veterans transition meeting the hospital suggested, and she arrived like someone who'd been honed by storms. Short gray hair, a voice that landed like a hammer on steel. She skimmed my file once and said plainly that line no counselor had said before. Surviving an assault at 2 a.m. and returning to the same house wasn't fear. It was data collection. The laugh that escaped me felt brittle, but it broke something open. She handed me a worn leather notebook stamped "Measure twice, cut once." "Your mind's an engineer's," she said. "You don't fight noise with more noise. You build a structure strong enough to trap it." From then on, I wrote everything. Times, temperatures, exact phrases, the way a hand trembled around a glass. Each entry tightened the frame beneath a truth that had been loose for years. Helping Dad with old financial papers, I found a check made out to Landon with Robert's name scrawled across it. The curve at the tail of the R matched Marjorie's hand, too steady to be his. I scanned it, saved an encrypted copy, and sent it anonymously to Elaine. Her reply was terse. "You're not collecting evidence anymore, Christina. You're designing a case." That night, a scrap of paper slid under my door. "Stop filming, or next time it won't be your shoulder." My hands shook, but I photographed it, sealed it, labeled it Threat Number 1. Elaine sat with me and told a story about being called dramatic in uniform, how she'd learned to out-design lies rather than argue with them. Hearing that made the work feel less lonely. One afternoon, I reassembled an old robotic arm in her garage, bolts and servos catching sparks. She watched as I soldered a joint, nodded, and said, "That's what you're doing with your life, rebuilding broken arms." I touched the scar along my shoulder and answered, "Then I'll make sure it never breaks again." We worked until the shop light turned a warm gold, two women shaping metal and plans in the same motion. I went home under the pretense of visiting, aware that their smiles were brittle stage props. Marjorie opened the door like a hostess in a portrait. Perfect hair, perfect concern. "How's therapy in Sneered?" she asked. "Learning to calm down yet?" I answered simply that I was learning to measure things accurately. She didn't hear the edge. That afternoon, Marjorie invited the churchwomen for tea. Their chatter filled the living room with small talk and larger judgments. "She's back?" "Brave," one said. "I would have moved states," Marjorie murmured. "She's delicate, bless her heart." I stood in the threshold and hit record on my phone. Machines don't lie. After they left, I went to the basement she claimed was locked for renovations. The new padlock looked recent. The paint around the door peeled to reveal older, darker wood. I used a screwdriver, the same kind that had once punctured my skin, to pry the hinge. A chemical tang hit me first. Solvents. Improvised reagents. The stale breath of a hidden lab. The security camera had been unplugged. My old bloodstain marked the floor like testimony. I scraped a sample into a vial and capped it. Proof, I thought, doesn't evaporate. Upstairs. My father's voice trembled with desperation. "If this goes public, I'll lose everything." Marjorie replied sharp and clinical. "Then you better control your daughter." The sentence cut deeper than any shove. He feared reputation more than he feared what his silence had cost me. I walked out into falling snow, the little blue LED from my vent camera winking in the window. Back in my temporary workspace, I linked motion sensors and thermal feeds into a single map and named it Project Echo. Heat signatures pulsed across the screen. Audio spikes marked voices I would later isolate. I wrote in Elaine's notebook, "Data doesn't sleep. Neither do I." The monitor blinked to life. Recording started. Zero wires. I sent Marjorie an email. "If Landon apologizes publicly, I'll withdraw the report." Less than 10 minutes later, she replied. That's the Christina I raised. Saturday came. She set the table like it was Easter. White cloth, lavender candles, china plates that had never seen a real family meal. I wore a high-neck sweater to hide my scar, the micro-transmitter Elaine had fitted around my neck. Marjorie greeted me with that glassy smile. "We just want to heal, dear." Robert lifted his glass. To family, to forgiveness. I raised mine. To transparency. Landon's eyes were bloodshot, his grin unsteady. The scrape of cutlery filled the silence. Then he smirked. "So, engineer girl, still collecting your precious data?" "Always. Even if you talk, nobody'll believe you. Mom's got dad. Dad's got money. You've got, what? Notes?" Marjorie's hand brushed his arm. "Enough, honey." Then softly to me, "And that little accident at 2 a.m. stays buried if you stay quiet." I took a slow breath, met her eyes. "Good thing I'm not here to talk. I'm here to listen, outside." Elaine waited in her car, saving the recording as soon as that line left Marjorie's mouth. When it was done, Marjorie hugged me. "I'm proud of you for acting civilized. Civilization is just order with better lighting." Snow melted warm against my shoulder as I walked away. 2 days later, I sat in Daniel's office, walls of glass and white light. Elaine beside me, arms crossed. Daniel said I'd built enough proof for both civil and criminal charges, but they'd call me unstable. "Then let's build something they can't twist." I answered. We drew the plan, Operation Killbox, a reconciliation meeting, staged in Daniel's office, recorded from every angle. Elaine smiled. We won't humiliate them. Their words will. That night, my father called, voice shaking. Your stepbrother's sick. Don't ruin his life. He didn't mean to hurt you, I asked. Did he mean it when he said he'd kill me next time? Silence, then, don't be dramatic. I hung up. Later, I checked Project Echo. Landon packed bags of white powder, while Marjorie said, make sure to move it before Saturday. She's coming. I clipped the file, sent it to Daniel. The next evening, Elaine fastened a small B, F, J, pin to my lapel. You're not going to war, she said. You're finishing construction. I met my own reflection. No longer the girl they silenced, but the design built to expose them. I never believed in clean endings. But that morning, stepping into the conference room at Vermont Legal Corps, I understood that even truth needs a steel frame to stand on. The oak walls gleamed under cold light, reflections sharp as blades. In the center sat a covered screen prepared for our so-called reconciliation. My father's hands trembled over his old vest. Marjorie's eyes glistened, all polish and poison. Landon leaned back, smirking. Daniel Howe's voice cut through the quiet. We're here to clarify what really happened at 2 a.m. and after. I gripped the leather notebook in my lap, the one that had held every fact, every wound. Daniel pulled the cloth away. Footage from Project Echo filled the screen. Landon mixing chemicals. Marjorie's voice hissing on the phone. Make sure it's gone before Saturday. And the forged signature glowing under magnification. No one moved. The light shattered across their faces like breaking masks. Next came the audio. Landon's laughter. Marjorie's whisper. That little accident at 2 a.m. will stay buried. Then my own voice, calm and cold. Good thing I'm not here to talk. I'm here to listen. Now. The whole room listened with me. My father shouted, Stop it! Enough! Daniel met his eyes. You knew. He collapsed into silence. Landon slammed the table. You think this proves anything? The door opened. Officers stepped in. Marjorie's voice cracked. This will destroy our family. No, I said. You destroyed it when you called my truth dramatic. As the handcuffs clicked, I breathed fully for the first time. The red light on the microphone kept glowing, recording the final sound of a perfect family breaking. 3 months after the trial, I returned to the old wooden house in Vermont. It no longer felt like a prison, just a frame waiting to be rebuilt. The police seals were gone. The white paint on the walls had cracked, revealing the raw wood beneath. Rough, imperfect, but honest. I pulled down the heavy curtains and unlatched the windows. Sunlight spilled in, scattering the dust like silver rain. In a desk drawer, I found a half-burned sheet of paper. The robot design I'd torn up when I was 16. The edges were blackened, but one line in the center remained untouched. To rebuild what others break, I pressed it flat and framed it on the wall. Elaine arrived that afternoon, carrying a small box of audio gear. We'll start the pilot program here, she said. People who weren't believed, their stories, recorded by one who was. Together, we transformed the basement, once filled with chemicals and lies, into a soundproof studio. A brass plate gleamed on the door. Operation 2 a.m., where silence ends. A week later, a letter arrived. From Robert Barnes. I was wrong. I let fear design my life. I hope you'll forgive an old architect of mistakes. I placed it beside the fire without opening it. Forgiveness wasn't freedom. I already had that. As the paper burned, orange light flickered across the microphone's steel casing. Justice reflecting real fire this time. That night, I recorded our first story. A 40-year-old woman, voice trembling as she spoke of a husband no one believed capable of violence. When she finished, she whispered, I feel lighter. I turned off the mic and smiled. That's what rebuilding sounds like. A soft click echoed through the room. No longer a weapon, but the sound of something new beginning. 2 years later, the stage lights in Washington, D.C. burned brighter than I remembered. The banner behind me read, Engineering for resilience. I stepped forward in a gray, steel-toned suit, the scar on my shoulder catching the glow like a weld line. Below me sat engineers, veterans, survivors, lawyers, and Elaine in the front row, her eyes steady. I touched the old leather notebook in my pocket and began. 2 years ago, at 2 a.m., my stepbrother stabbed me. My parents laughed. They called me dramatic. The room fell silent. But I'm an engineer. I rebuilt, not the house, not even the family. I rebuilt the structure inside me. Light spilled across the stage, a silver arc over my shoulder. I lifted the microphone. They called it a breakdown. I call it a blueprint. The audience rose. Applause thundered like rain on metal. Afterward, a woman approached, mother of a soldier who hadn't been believed. She held my hand and whispered, "You built what the world needed." Outside, snow drifted through the deep sea air. It landed on my shoulder and melted warm. I looked up at the pale sky, whispering to myself. I only measured what was broken and fixed it. The flakes kept falling, soft as light on steel.